Okay, so we'll go ahead and start our next lecture, which is based on how groups change our individual behavior. So here we go. Now, in general, does the presence of others make you perform better or worse at a variety of tasks? So think about like running your fastest mile, giving a presentation, solving a complicated problem, shooting a free throw. Now, think about doing these either alone or when people are watching. With any of these, would you perform better or worse? And again, the answer to any of these could be both yes and no, of course. Some examples of these, okay, for a professional athlete who has shot hundreds of thousands of free throws, it is possible that they'll actually shoot free throws possibly better in the presence of a crowd because they are energized and motivated and in the zone. Whereas for some of us, when we give a presentation, if you add an audience, that's going to enhance our nervousness and possibly result in us doing a poorer job. But the presence of others doesn't necessarily have one universal effect. So here's the thing, what changes simply because other people are there? And again, we're not just talking about performance, we're talking about our behavior in general. And this was one of the questions that one of the first social psychologists actually experimentally studied. And we've already talked about him. His name's Norman Triplett. And what he noticed, and again, at the end of the 19th century, is that cyclists did seem to race faster when they're in the presence of others, when they were racing others. And so he wanted to test it experimentally. And so he performed a simple task with children, um, uh, reeling fishing lines. And he had them do it alone and then alongside other children. And he found that kids actually performed better and faster in the presence of others. And with that being said, that spurred the development of what is called the social facilitation theory in that the presence of others actually enhances our performance in a variety of tasks. And again, these findings are not perfect necessarily, because later research did show that sometimes others make performance worse. It depends on the situation. But in this case, in the presence of others, you might perform better because of the competition or the physiological arousal or motivation, or you don't want to look bad. But again, um, researchers ran into a problem because sometimes, again, audiences helped and sometimes they hurt. And so it depends on the task. So, again, with social facilitation, what they found is the presence of others can improve performance when the task is easy or familiar, or again, you've shot hundreds of thousands of free throws. But there's also social inhibition in which people perform much more poorly in the presence of others when a task is difficult or it's new or it's more complex in nature. And so there was another theorist, Robert Zajonc. Forgive me, I'm sure I'm getting that name incorrect. Proposed an explanation that brought these contradictory findings together in 1965, and his facilitation model brought in the concept of a what's called a dominant response. And now the dominant response for anybody is the response that is most likely. It comes most readily in nature. Okay, and so with that being said, okay, for an easier, well-learned task, okay, something that we do regularly. So again, let's say we've shot hundreds of thousands of free throws. Great. The dominant response, because it's now an easier, well-learned task, the dominant response is we're probably going to make the free throw. And based upon this model, in the presence of others, our performance is going to increase because it's an easy and well-learned task. Now, on the other hand, if we've never shot a free throw in our life and all of a sudden we're doing it, the dominant response is that we're probably going to miss more free throws than we make. And so in this case, yes, with the presence of others and the arousal, the it's an increase in performing the dominant response, which is missing the free throw. That's going to result in social inhibition. We're not performing as well in the presence of others. So basically, others strengthen what you were already most likely to do. So if I'm more likely to make a free throw, in the presence of others, I'm probably going to be making more free throws. Whereas if I am not good at free throw shooting and you put me in front of an audience or a crowd, I am going to be less likely to make free throws. And again, this it does not cover everything absolutely because there are people who do not perform well in general or not great at something, but you put them in front of an audience and they do fantastic. And just because somebody practices, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will automatically perform amazingly under pressure in front of an audience either. So just to throw those things out here. But here's the thing. Okay. Watching me work can make me try harder as well. And putting me into a group, here's the thing though, it actually might make me try less. So let's talk about when we work together, how we individually behave. And this is getting into the Ringelmann effect. So let's say if I can pull 100 pounds and you can pull 100 pounds, what should we be able to pull together? I guess 200. Mathematically, right? And so if eight people pull together, should we be able to pull 800 pounds? Max Ringelmann actually tested it and found that the result, as the group output increased, individual effort decreased. And the technical definition of this is that groups do often outperform individuals overall, of course, but each additional member adds progressively less productivity. So the more people that you put into a group, the less likely that they are going to try as hard. So of course, if you have one person lifting and they can lift 100 pounds, but then you have four people trying to lift something, they're going to probably be able to lift more than 100 pounds together, but they're not going to be able to lift 400 pounds, which would be in proportion to the 100 pounds the one person is lifting. So one of the explanations for this, and again, and so you can see this, I did put this in here, is that, okay, as the number of team members increases, you would expect effort to also, again, increase as the number of team members increases. But you can see the actual effort actually plateaus here. And so we're getting less effort with the more people that are in the group. And so one of the explanations for this is motivation, in that individuals might exert less effort or they can't synchronize the pulling from this study. So how could researchers figure out whether people were actually trying less or coordinating less in regard to this pulling? So they found an interesting way to remove the coordination problem and ask, are people just trying less? And this gets into what we call social loafing. Latanya, Williams, and Harkins. Latanya comes in later as well. In 1979, studied this, and participants were asked to shout and clap as loudly as possible. Sometimes they performed alone. Other times they thought they were performing with other people. Now, here's the thing. Researchers could measure each individual's individual effort. And what happened is that the individual effort actually decreased when participants thought that they were in groups with other people. They put blindfolds. And I think like headphones, yeah, they put headphones and blindfolds on them. So they didn't know if they were in a group or not. But when they believed that they were in a group, they actually didn't try as hard. And that resulted in the development of the concept of social loafing, which is putting forth less individual effort when working toward a collective goal than when working alone. Example, group projects in school. If you were doing the activity or the project by yourself, probably going to have to put in 100%. But as soon as there are six people in the group, you're probably going to have a couple of people that are doing the majority of the work and everybody else does very little. That is social loafing. And so, why would simply believing other people are helping make you try less? Like, why would this happen? And maybe somebody else will do it. If I don't contribute, nobody's really going to notice. I don't really have to work harder than others, and it doesn't really matter if I try hard. And so part of the reason is if my individual contribution becomes harder to identify, the incentive to actually try decreases. And again, we've all probably ran into this when we've been put in a group project. Yes, this is the best joke I have today, the social loafing. But these social loafs think that they are free loafing or freeloading. Hilarious. So it's going to be most likely when, again, you can't tell who is putting in the work. When the group gets larger, if the task feels it's not that, like, it's not important. When other people are also going to be um, expected to loaf, like, other people aren't trying hard, so why should I try hard? I'm not going to be the one that does everything. And it's going to de social loafing will decrease when individual effort is visible and meaningful. So in a group project, from my perspective as an instructor, you would have to assign specific roles for the project, smaller groups, make sure everybody is individually accountable, have to evaluate individual contributions on their own, have to really incentivize each person's work as well. So, okay, here we've been talking about work so far and performance. And in a group, as we can see, it becomes easier to think like somebody else is going to do it. But what if what needs to be done isn't a group project? What if somebody actually needs help, but we're still in a group? The problem is the same thought kind of goes into play here, and that somebody else will do something and we don't have to. Okay, so if you're alone and somebody else collapses, whose problem is it? Okay, it's mine. I'm the only person there. I can't look to anybody else for help. Nobody else is going to call 911. I am responsible. But let's say there's 20 people there. Objectively and logically, it's still everybody's responsibility. But subjectively and perceptively, the responsibility is going to spread out amongst everybody. And this is where we get into the diffusion of responsibility, in that the responsibility is going to be distributed amongst bystanders. So the individual sense of obligation and responsibility is going to decrease. It's not that people don't care or are selfish or bad people, but in regard to, okay, we're going back to week four to a couple weeks ago, in regard to the temptation to see somebody who doesn't help, like they don't care as a dispositional attribution. Okay, but situation matters. And so here's the thing. Have you ever assumed somebody else had already done something? Okay, so maybe there's a spill on the floor at school and you see it and you're like, well, somebody else totally reported this already. Or honestly, I've done this before. I saw a cow alongside the road. And I know coming from a ranching community, like you call that in, you call the sheriff. And I've been like, well, somebody had to have already called them in, or there's a rancher that's already taken care of this. It's already good. We're good. So it's already done, taken care of. Okay, so we've probably already done that. And sometimes the more potential helpers, again, if we're thinking like, okay, anybody in the school could have taken care of this, or anybody who drove on this road could have called the cow in. The more potential helpers that there are can mean less responsibility felt by each individual helper. We take responsibility off of ourselves. And research has found that believing other bystanders were present reduced both personal responsibility and how fast we report what we believe to be an emergency. And so Darley and Latanya did create an experiment where they could test this. Now, this is their seizure experiment. So here's the way, and this was in 1968. And the way that this worked, okay, the participant, and again, there are Confederates in here. We've already talked about Confederates who were actors in the study. Um, Participants believed that they were discussing college life over an intercom. There were pre-recorded voices. They couldn't see others, so they were kind of like in cubicles, kind of. So they could only hear other people. And so during the discussion, another participant appeared to be having a seizure. Again, he could audibly hear that that person was having a seizure. Okay, so when it was just those two talking, they believed they were the only one who could hear the emergency. Or in the other situation, other people could hear it too. So, okay, the victim in this case, the actor, appeared to have a seizure, was having a hard time speaking, asking for help, and eventually stopped responding. So here's the thing. If they were the only person hearing it, or if there were five people hearing it, which one would result in a more likely response for help, to report for help? And again, the logical thing should be like, okay, if there's more people available to call for help, you would think that there's going to be a better chance that somebody will help. But again, like we were just talking about, and the diffusion of responsibility, every single person in a group thinks that somebody else knows. So somebody else is going to call 911. And also, somebody else is probably better qualified. I don't even know what it's people really, I don't know if it's really an emergency. Somebody probably has medical training, so I really shouldn't be saying anything. I don't even know what I would report. And again, what the only thing that changed between these conditions is the perceived presence of others. That's all there is. So the difference is pretty dramatic here. Okay, so when participants thought they were the only person who heard the person with the seizure, 85% of people helped, called for help, did something. Again, I don't know who those or those 15% are that didn't do anything. I don't know. But 85% of people helped when it was just them. But when they thought that four other people also heard it and could also help, only one out of three people helped. That is a significant difference. And as the group size increased, those that did helped much slower than if it was just the participant and the actor. And so the conclusion of the study was that the responsibility literally diffused across the bystanders because, again, somebody else probably heard it. Somebody else was getting help. Somebody else might know what to do. And again, it's not that the people in the larger group cared less about the victim. There's no evidence of that at all. The participants all they did seem to be distressed in these groups. The difference was the interpretation of their responsibility. If it's just them and the person having the seizure, they interpreted it as their responsibility because there's nobody else to do anything. Somebody needs help. I have to do something. But if there's other people there, well, somebody's got to do something. But it doesn't necessarily have to be me. And that even harkens back to subjective construal in that the meaning of the same event changes depending upon the social context. That person is still having a seizure, but the way we interpret it is going to be different if we're alone compared to whether we're in a group. And it's not that people never help when others are around. I just have to say that. The bystander effect just indicates that it is more probabilistic that people are less likely to help. Just to put that out there. We see plenty of situations that in large crowds or stadiums, if somebody has a medical emergency, somebody does help. Okay, so again, the bystander effect, it doesn't mean that people are heartless. It means the presence of others can change the way we behave, which gets in the way of intervention. Okay, so before we can decide whether we're going to help, we have to decide, is something wrong? Okay, is this actually an emergency? And the thing about this is the presence of people can also make this decision harder as well. So we'll go through this next concept, then we'll take a break. But this leads us to the smoke-filled room and the concept of pluralistic ignorance. So sometimes emergencies are obvious. Okay, like there is blood splatter everywhere, and I hate to be so gruesome. Yeah, I do have a criminal justice background. I am morbid. Those of you who have no idea who I am, apologies. But sometimes they're obvious. But sometimes these situations are ambiguous. Again, there's somebody lying on a sidewalk, a couple people are arguing, there's a strange sound next door, smoke appears in the room. Okay, do we know for sure that these are emergencies? Yeah, strange noises in your house at night. When to worry. That was a bizarre photo I came across. A couple that's arguing, at what point as a neighbor are you like, okay, I should call the cops? Like, where's the line? Smoke appearing in your room, I really would do something about that. But um, with the seizure study, you knew something was wrong. Somebody having a seizure, that is an emergency. But again, now we're getting into, okay, is it an emergency? The person on the ground, are they injured? Maybe they're sleeping, maybe they're just drunk. When it's ambiguous, you have to kind of look to others for information. And this is going back all the way to, I think, last week with Sharif in the ambiguous situation with the autokinetic effect and the light. We really didn't, the participants couldn't tell how far it was moving, and so they looked to others to help them determine how far that light was moving. And that was the informational social influence. In that, like, I'm not quite sure, so I'm going to lean on others, and that is going to alter how I perceive the situation. Same thing here. So if nobody else seems concerned, like maybe I'm overreacting. So literally, if somebody's laying on the sidewalk and everybody else is walking past them, well, maybe it's 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning on O Street in Lincoln. They're probably just drunk, so I'm going to keep walking. Now, the problem is that because I'm thinking this, everybody else also might be thinking this, and they might be they may be looking at you. So everybody's privately concerned, but because nobody's doing anything, everybody is publicly calm. And because of this, and everybody's kind of like, well, nobody else is doing anything, so I'm not going to do anything, and I'm just going to act normal. Apparently, everything is fine. That's the conclusion. So sometimes other people's calm behavior is evidence to us that there is no emergency, even when they're just as uncertain as we are. Just because somebody's calm does not mean that they know for sure that there is not an emergency. They're doing the same things that we are. They're looking at us too, who is also probably acting calm. So, Latanya and Darley did another um, study with this in 68. So, participants sat in a room and they just completed a questionnaire. Then what happened is smoke started to enter the room. And so there were two situations, participants were either alone or with other people. In one condition, the other people were actors that were instructed to just, again, remain calm. And so, yeah, literally, like, what would you do? You're seeing smoke. Like, would you leave? So, let's go ahead and just watch. This is actually video from that study. Or I think it's been replicated, but it is this nonetheless. Okay, so now here are the results. And you saw how long she sat in there. And this was replicated with plenty of participants, but with the first participant, she was out of there. She was out of there. Um, but as there were more and more actors that entered the study, the longer it took to do anything. So, um, again, when everybody looked calm, participants who reported the smoke, when they were alone, 75%. Again, that quarter of participants who said nothing, I'm sorry, I'm getting up and doing something, but they are way too calm about a situation. They must have been waiting for a smoke alarm. I am not, but 75% reported it. Now, when the group got to as big as three, so there were two other participants that were actors, only about one out of three people reported it. Then with two passive, that might be a little wrong. Confederates, I am sorry, I did get that wrong. So with three naive participants, okay, there are participants in here. Sorry, the video is a replication. So with two other participants who had no idea what was going on, only one out of three did report it. But with two passive Confederates who looked calm the entire time, only one out of 10 reported it. And you saw in the video how long that participant was willing to sit there as the smoke filled the room. So, again, why would somebody sit in a room filled with smoke? Because people aren't reacting. Again, it's not necessarily stupidity. And again, the situation's kind of ambiguous. You don't know if the room is on fire or not. So you do look to others, and if other people appear calm, well, it must not be an emergency, and so you remain calm. And so now your calm becomes information for other people, And so this is where we get into the concept of pluralistic ignorance, in that everybody might actually be concerned about the situation, but so they're privately experiencing the concern, but they assume that other people aren't concerned either because their outward behavior suggests that everything is fine, so nothing must be wrong. So I'm concerned, but they look calm, so maybe I'm reacting, so I look calm, but then they see me look calm, and that's going to reinforce this. And so nothing's wrong, so nobody does anything. So sometimes everyone is waiting for somebody else to define the situation. So I know we gotta wrap this part up and then we'll come back. There's two different bystander problems. So we have the pluralistic ignorance, which we just talked about. Is this actually an emergency? And we look to others to interpret the situation. And if everybody appears calm, maybe there's nothing wrong. So then I appear calm, and everybody thinks because I and others appear calm, that nothing's wrong. And we all just sit and watch. Then we have the diffusion of responsibility. Is it my responsibility? And as the group gets larger, our perception of responsibility decreases. And so we assume like, okay, somebody else is going to handle it. So with pluralistic argument, ignorance, it's not an emergency, so we don't need to do anything. With diffusion of responsibility, it's not my responsibility, so I don't need to act. And that's where we're going to take a break. Thanks for hanging in there with me for this very, very long one. We will be back soon.